Have you ever looked at your life and thought, am I already too late? At 45, he had no investments. He didn't know what the S&P 500 was. He had no idea how stocks worked. Just a mid-level office job, a cycle of credit card debt, and a quiet, lingering fear. Is it too late to start over? But today, at 60, he's a millionaire. Not from winning the lottery, not from someone showing him the way, and definitely not from getting lucky. It all started on an ordinary afternoon with one sentence that hit deep. I don't want to work until I die. That moment sparked a quiet transformation, a financial journey no one, not even he, saw coming. In this video, I'll show you three things. First, how someone who knew nothing about stocks at 45 built $1 million portfolio in just 15 years. Second, a simple but powerful financial strategy you can start with, even if you only have $50 a month. And third, the real reason most adults never achieve financial freedom, and how you can avoid that fate. I've spent weeks researching this story, fact-checking numbers, studying timelines, so you don't just get inspiration, you get a clear path. And if you've ever thought, it's too late for me, I hope this story makes you think again, because his journey didn't start with money. It started with a single decision. And right now, you're about to see how that one choice changed everything. Have you ever woken up one morning, stared at the ceiling, and quietly asked yourself, where did all those years go? That's exactly what he, let's call him David, felt on a gloomy October morning. The sky was gray, light rain tapping gently on the window of his third-floor apartment. It was the same place he had lived in for over a decade. No more smell of toast or fresh coffee like when his wife was still around. Just the hum of an old refrigerator and a glass of lukewarm tap water sitting quietly on a scratched wooden table. Outside, his neighbor's faded brown SUV slowly rolled out of the parking lot, leaving behind uneven puddles under the dim streetlight. David had just turned 45. He worked in operations at a small distribution company in Pennsylvania. Every morning, he drove to work. Every night, he came home, washed up, had a simple meal, and turned on the TV, rarely remembering what he watched. Life was like a song with no chorus, repetitive but never rising to anything meaningful. Then came the email from HR, cost-cutting measures. One of his teammates, someone who had sat across from him for the past 8 years, was let go. David forced a chuckle, glad it wasn't me. But deep down, something sank, because he knew if it was him, he had nothing to fall back on. No emergency fund, no investments, no house, no stocks, no retirement plan. Just a credit card with nearly $6,000 in debt and a checking account with barely a few $100. That night, for the first time in years, he opened his laptop and typed into Google, "What to do if you have nothing saved at 45?" Dozens of sites came up, full of complicated jargon. YouTube videos delivered advice with cold, robotic tones. David closed the laptop, sat in silence. The room was so quiet, he could hear the clock ticking. And then he cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears landing on his hands because of helplessness, regret, and the quiet fear that maybe it was already too late. That's what they call a midlife financial crisis. But no one really talks about it. It's not loud like being broke in your 20s. It's not obvious like filing for bankruptcy. It's quiet, subtle, like soft rain at night, tapping on your heart, whispering again and again, what will you do when you're too old to keep working? But that moment, that silent night on a wooden chair with nothing left to lose, was also the beginning of something powerful, awareness. David didn't need to know everything. He just needed to stop pretending everything was fine. And that's one of the most powerful first steps in anyone's personal finance story. The small takeaway here is this: you don't need to be rich to begin, but you do need to begin, so you don't have to live in fear later. And that's exactly what David did the next morning. He picked up a notebook and wrote one simple line. Today is day one. But where do you even begin? When you're starting at zero and time is no longer on your side, how do you move forward? The answer didn't come in a big breakthrough. It came in a simple habit, something he discovered while walking past his local library. And that is what we'll explore in the next part of this story. Can a $4 book from a public library really change someone's entire financial path? At age 45, 1 week after that sleepless night, David, our character, walked into a small public library on a quiet street in Lancaster. He didn't go there with a grand plan. After finishing his evening shift, instead of going straight home and collapsing in front of the TV like usual, he took a detour down a tree-lined street where golden leaves fell gently on his graying hair. The glass door gave a soft ding as David stepped inside. The scent of old paper, aged wood, and the warm yellow light made him feel unusually calm. He passed by the personal finance shelf, one he had never paid attention to before. A thin, slightly worn book with a yellow cover caught his eye. The title was simple: The Richest Man in Babylon. Not How to Get Rich Quick. Not Crypto for Beginners. Just a story about ordinary people from thousands of years ago who somehow managed money wisely. David had no idea that this would be the first step in an entirely new financial journey. He finished the book over 3 evenings, reading under the soft glow of a desk lamp in his modest living room with a cup of hot tea beside him. The pages were light, but the lessons were timeless, like the scent of desert dust, the clink of gold coins, and the kinds of financial truths that never grow old. Pay yourself first. Save at least 10%. Don't invest in things you don't understand. He started exactly there, paying himself first. No stock market accounts yet, no investment moves. Just this: every payday, he'd move 10% of his check into a separate account. Untouchable. Every week, he wrote down all his spending in a small notebook, one column for essentials, another for emotional buys. Just recognizing the difference between those two began to change how he saw money. At first, he didn't feel richer. He felt lighter, as if he had finally taken back some control over his life. No longer floating helplessly through paycheck after paycheck. He knew where each dollar went and why. After 3 months of this, David had saved $900, money he once believed he could never keep. And from there, he started learning about investing. Not from flashy YouTubers or hype-filled trends, but from honest blogs, humble books, and a few like-minded friends. So, what's the lesson here? Change doesn't always come from one big decision. It starts with one small, steady habit, like a drop of water carving through stone. If you're feeling overwhelmed, don't think about $1 million. Think about how much you can save for yourself today before life pulls it all away. And for David, it was those simple habits that led to the next step of his journey, the first time he put money into the stock market, even though he knew nothing about investing. Was it too late? Was it too risky? We'll find out in the next part. Do you remember the feeling of doing something for the first time, when you're not entirely sure what you're doing? Like learning to swim, when your feet still touch the bottom of the pool, but your heart's already racing? That was exactly how David felt when he decided to put his very first dollars into the stock market at age 46. That evening, he sat at his old Dell laptop, the keyboard worn thin. On the screen was an investment platform filled with blinking red and green charts, unfamiliar ticker symbols, and numbers he didn't understand. A dim yellow desk lamp cast light across his tense face. The tiny room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, it had started to rain, soft drops tapping against the metal roof, echoing the rhythm of his heartbeat. Nervous, uncertain, but determined. David didn't invest because he knew everything. He invested because he had started to understand himself. After 3 months of disciplined saving, he had almost $900. He decided to invest half, but not in the trendy stocks everyone was talking about. Instead, he went back to the local library and picked up a book, The Boglehead's Guide to Investing. It was a thin paperback, but it had changed the lives of millions of ordinary Americans. In those pages, David discovered index funds, and he was instantly drawn in. No need to pick individual stocks, no need to watch the market every day. Just invest steadily into the entire market and let time do the rest. To him, it felt like planting seeds. You don't need to be a weather expert. You just need to prepare the soil, water it, and trust the seasons. For the first time in his life, he opened an investment account. And when he finally clicked buy on his first fund, Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, he didn't feel fear anymore. He felt free. It was a quiet kind of freedom, like choosing to turn off the noise of the world just so you can hear your own voice more clearly. No one knew he was investing. No one was coaching him. But he felt like he was finally walking the right path. And every month after that, he added a little more. Sometimes $100, sometimes just $40. But he never stopped. And he learned something crucial. Investing isn't a get-rich-quick game. It's a game of staying power. David's story isn't flashy. There were no 200% overnight stock wins. But maybe that's why it's real. And over time, he realized what he was building wasn't just wealth. It was a personal financial system where every dollar had a purpose. Then one day, something unexpected happened. While jotting down his monthly budget in a little notebook, a stranger, who would later become his very first financial mentor, walked into his life. And that moment opened a whole new chapter, helping him not only invest smarter, but also begin to accelerate his financial journey. In the next part, you'll discover how David, once a total beginner, began to understand the rules of the game and avoided the most common mistakes that trip up new investors. Have you ever noticed how the people who change your life often arrive in the most unexpected moments? It was a drizzly Saturday afternoon. David sat at his usual neighborhood cafe, a quiet little spot with worn wooden tables, soft amber lights, and the scent of freshly ground coffee drifting through the air. It wasn't fancy, but it gave him peace. He opened his old leather notebook, the one he used to track every dollar he had ever invested since starting his financial journey. Each entry was a quiet testimony of persistence. That day, a neatly dressed older man took the seat next to him. They struck up a conversation almost by accident. His name was Thomas, a retired financial advisor who now volunteered with a nonprofit focused on financial education. When Thomas learned that David had just begun investing at age 46, he smiled and said, "Then you're walking the same road I've helped hundreds walk before." Thomas didn't preach. He didn't overwhelm David with complex theories. Instead, he shared real stories, from wealthy clients who failed despite their money to regular workers who quietly built financial freedom. The biggest mistake new investors make, he said, is thinking they have to beat the market. But really, all you need to do is not lose to yourself. That moment sparked something. They started meeting once a month. Same cafe, same warm lighting. Thomas never handed him hot stock picks or fast-track investment tips. He taught David how to build a system, how to allocate his assets, why low-cost index funds matter, and most importantly, how to stay calm when the market gets shaky. David began to understand that investing wasn't about being smart. It was about being steady. Like growing a garden, you don't need to be the best, just consistent and patient enough to wait for the harvest. And Thomas taught him something even deeper. Don't keep your journey to yourself. When you learn to achieve financial freedom, he said, you're not just helping yourself. You're planting seeds for the next generation. That message stayed with David. From working full-time, selling things on weekends, saving every extra dollar, David now had not only a strong personal finance system, but also started blogging to share what he'd learned. One of his posts, "How I Started Investing at 45, reached over 30,000 readers in just a week. The lesson here isn't that you need a mentor to succeed. It's this: stay open to learning and open your heart to meeting the right person at the right time. Sometimes the person who helps you see the path clearly isn't a YouTube guru. It's your spouse, a coworker, or even a stranger at the next table." Through those quiet, meaningful conversations, David stepped into a new chapter. Not just growing his account, but growing his vision of what financial freedom could really be. But the journey wasn't over, because in the next part of this story, you'll see how David handled his first market crash and what gave him the courage not only to stay calm, but to buy more. There's a question every investor eventually faces. What do you do when the market crashes and your account drops by tens of thousands overnight? David had mentally prepared himself for the long-term journey, but nothing could truly prepare him for the moment he opened his investment app and watched the numbers plummet like a roller coaster in free fall. It was a gloomy morning in March. The sky outside was gray. A light drizzle tapped gently on the window. The faint bitterness of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air. David turned on his computer, opened the charts, and froze. His portfolio had dropped more than $24,000 in just 3 weeks. It was 2020. The pandemic was triggering a global economic crisis. Even safe stocks like Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, and broad market ETFs were tanking. Online forums were in chaos. Some were panic selling, others begging for advice. Everyone was scared. And so was David. In the first 15 minutes, panic set in. His palms were sweaty. His heart raced. Everything he had worked so hard to build over the past 4 years was evaporating. He hovered his cursor over the sell button, but didn't click. In his mind, he heard Thomas's voice. People don't lose money because the market drops. They lose it because they react the wrong way when it does. David took a deep breath. He shut the laptop, grabbed his raincoat, and stepped outside. The rain had picked up, but it wasn't harsh. It was just cold enough to snap his mind into clarity. He walked through the nearby park, where winter still lingered. Bare maple trees stood silent, and the wind rustled their branches like quiet whispers, reminding him to stay calm. Back home, he brewed a cup of tea. He sat down and opened his investment notebook, flipping through the pages. His long-term goals, his why, his notes on not selling out of fear. That night, he didn't sell. Instead, he spent a few hours reviewing his portfolio and handpicking quality stocks that had dipped deeply in price. The next morning, while most were selling in fear, he bought more. Not because he was fearless, but because he was prepared. That preparation didn't come from hype. It came from discipline, from a plan. The lesson here isn't just to buy the dip. It's this. You need an investment strategy that's so grounded in purpose, you can trust it even when everything around you feels like it's falling apart. The market will always cycle, up, down, and up again, but your emotions will always scream louder than logic unless you train for these moments in advance. From that first panic, David didn't just preserve his account. He grew it by 18% over the following year, thanks to the strategic moves he made when others were retreating. And this leads us into the next chapter, a turning point David never saw coming. The biggest investment opportunity of his life, born from what looked like a total loss. But what happened next? And how did a moment of fear unlock $1 million future? We'll explore that in the next part. Have you ever made a decision that felt like a mistake, but somehow it led to the biggest opportunity of your life? In the summer of 2021, David received an email from the bank, an update about a small investment he had completely forgotten about. It was a dividend fund he had purchased back in 2018, simply because the name sounded familiar. Vanguard Dividend Growth. At the time, he didn't know much. He just remembered Thomas once saying, companies that pay consistent dividends usually have strong financial health. So he bought a few shares, around $3,000 worth. 3 years went by. David didn't touch it. No contributions, no withdrawals. And yet by mid-2021, the fund had grown to over $7,800, not including the reinvested dividends, which had quietly increased his total number of shares. Compound interest was doing its quiet work. And for the first time, David truly understood the saying, it's not about when you invest, it's about how long you leave it alone. Around the same time, a friend from his investing community, Rachel, sold part of her portfolio to buy a small condo. She shared that she started investing back in 2010, just $150 a month, into an S&P 500 index fund. Today, her investment portfolio had grown to over $400,000. Her story was like a living mirror, not to compare, but to learn from. David adopted a strategy called Core and Explore. Most of his money stayed in long-term index funds like VOO, VTI, SCHD. But a smaller portion, around 10 to 15%, was reserved for controlled experiments, investing in companies he personally believed in, based on value and business ethics. He no longer panicked during market dips. Instead, he learned to observe. Every Sunday morning, he'd sit on his balcony with a fresh cup of drip coffee in hand, sunlight filtering through the trees in his backyard. He'd open his notebook and write down what was working, what needed adjusting. And he realized something important. Personal finance isn't about hitting it big. It's a journey of clarity, consistency, and knowing why you do what you do. From someone who knew nothing about stocks at 45, David had built a clear investment strategy. Not because he was smarter, but because he was willing to learn, admit mistakes, and stay patient. The real lesson here isn't about choosing the perfect fund or the perfect stock. It's about choosing the right mindset. Wealth doesn't come from a lucky strike. It comes from small, right actions repeated over time. And if you're wondering, what's David's total investment worth now? And exactly how did he hit the $1 million milestone? That's coming up in the final part of this story, where every effort, mistake, and small decision connects into a much bigger picture. Financial freedom at an age no one expected. When David looks back on his journey from zero to $1 million, he can't quite remember the exact turning point. There was no dramatic moment, no lottery win, no explosive breakthrough, just small steps, sometimes slow, often uncertain, but always consistent. Paying himself first each month, reading a little more each week, pausing before every spending decision. And over time, those small repeated actions became something extraordinary. He didn't become a millionaire because he was special. He became one because he was patient enough not to quit, because he chose to learn instead of complain, because he understood that financial freedom isn't for the lucky, it's for the intentional. And if you're still watching at this point, maybe somewhere inside you there's a question. Could I do it too? The answer is yes. You don't need to know everything to start. You just need to start. Whether you're 25, 35, or 50 years old, it doesn't matter. What matters most isn't when you begin. It's how much longer you're willing to wait. If you've been looking for a quiet push to begin changing your life, the stories on this channel are your roadmap. Every video is a slice of real life, of ordinary people, imperfect yet courageous enough to choose differently. And if David's story spoke to you, then I believe the next video, about a woman who rebuilt her life from pennies after bankruptcy, will show you that personal finance isn't magic. It's a skill you can learn, no matter where you're starting from. Stay with me on this journey, because sometimes just one small habit today can lead you to the life you've always dreamed of.